get started. So hello, everyone. My name is Neha Garg, and I work as a product lead here at Udacity. In my role, I work on deciding what courses we build and why, based on the demand that we are seeing from the market and what we are hearing from our hiring partners. So in that vein, I recently launched the School of Cloud Computing, and I am joined today by Kesha Williams, who is one of our instructors for those programs. So I'll let Kesha introduce herself. Kesha, do you want to introduce yourself very quickly to this audience?
Sure. My name is Kesha Williams. I've been in IT for about 24 years, and I definitely have the gray hairs to prove it. I currently serve as a software engineering manager in the IT department of a company called Chick-fil-A, and I've been working a lot with the cloud and helping us migrate our legacy applications to the cloud. So that's a little bit about me.
So that's a lot of experience in cloud space, Kesha. So everybody, I'll be, for the first few minutes, I'll be asking some questions to Kesha directly. But if you have questions that I should ask Kesha or any other question about the program or Udacity in general, there is a Q&A link at the bottom of this that you can find at the bottom of Zoom, where you can ask your questions, and we would be moderating all the questions to make sure that your questions get answered or addressed. All right, so with that, Kesha, as you know, cloud computing is all the hype today. You hear that word all around you. Can you talk to me a bit about what is cloud computing?
Sure. So first, I'd like to say that, being in the IT industry for 24 years, I remember the days before cloud computing, and I remember now the days of cloud computing. And cloud computing is definitely a game changer. So think about it like this. You essentially have all of these services, so storage services, compute power, databases, all of these services in the cloud, and you manage it through the internet. So with cloud computing, you no longer have to worry about standing up your own internal data centers, but yet you still have access to all of the services you need to create, build, and deploy applications through the internet. So it's really cool.
Well, that's good to hear. So one of the recent stats that I heard is at least 60 to 70% of the companies today are investing in this space. And what do you think are some of the main factors that companies are investing in this space or trying to understand this space better?
Definitely there is a huge cost savings, because no longer do you have to make this huge capital investment upfront to buy resources. So if you're using a cloud provider, you're able to pay as you go. You only pay when your code is running. So there's a huge cost savings. And now you can also more readily focus on innovation, because the resources that you had dedicated to managing this internal data center, they can now be repurposed to focus on what differentiates your business from its competitors. So really allowing you to take your business to the next level. And definitely faster delivery time. So again, because you're not worrying about servers, you're able to focus on building systems. And so you have a faster time to market. So there are a lot of benefits to using the cloud.
That's definitely, I think, one of the main reasons. And I have even heard some of the very innovative tech companies are now just starting with cloud in the first place, right? Like for example, Netflix is all mostly on cloud as well these days. So that's definitely, I think, one of the main reasons there. So when we talk about cloud computing, Kesha, what are some of the latest trends do you see in this space?
I definitely see trends around artificial intelligence. So there are a lot of cloud providers rolling out services around machine learning, computer vision, and robotics, really just helping us analyze and process all of this big data that we have, just to build better insights and to help move our business forward. So I've seen a lot of investment in artificial intelligence or AI. I've also seen a huge investment in IoT services that enable just processing data received from IoT devices. So IoT, that's just essentially where an everyday device like a microwave or a refrigerator or a light bulb connects to the internet and sends data back for processing. So I've seen a huge investment there again in IoT services. Additional trends I've seen surround this hybrid model, where there are companies where some of their data lives in their existing data center, but then the application that interacts with that data lives in the cloud. So the hybrid model, I've seen a lot of that as well.
Okay. So for the trends in ML and IoT that you spoke about, is it also driven by the cost savings for the companies, or are there like other factors driving those trends to cloud computing?
Definitely, I think it's cost savings, but then also just the ease of use. So with AWS, there are a lot of machine learning services that just make it easier for an average developer, an everyday developer, to build a machine learning model to help just analyze and understand data and help move the business forward. So just really cost savings and the speed to market.
So then I think does it make sense for an aspiring student who wants to be in machine learning to also understand cloud computing and how to work with different services? Would that be correct to say?
Definitely, because what I've seen, just the services that they provide in the cloud, like I said before, an everyday developer can go in and build this machine learning model. So definitely, I would agree with that.
Okay. So I as you know, Udacity is based out of Silicon Valley, and in Silicon Valley, I've seen like some companies have readily adopted cloud computing versus not. From your perspective, Kesha, what are you seeing as the trends there? Like which industries have readily adopted cloud computing versus which are still in the process of doing so?
Right. So industries, well, let me say this first. The biggest perceived, I guess, downside is security, right? So industries that are highly regulated, like the banking industry or the healthcare industry, they've been really slow to adopt the cloud. And there they use more of the hybrid model that I mentioned earlier. So you may have PII, personally identifiable data, or data about your customers in your internal data center because you feel good about the security around that data. But then you have a web application running in the cloud that displays that data to users. So really just any industry that's heavily regulated, I've seen them be kind of slow moving and adopting the cloud 100%.
Okay. That does make sense. And that's why, yeah, you're right, like hybrid cloud is some of the trends that we are observing in the industry as well. That does make sense. Okay, so now switching gears a bit, let's talk about the skills. So for a person who is interested in learning about cloud computing and like wants to know how, first of all, I want to ask from you, what's the difference between like building an app natively on cloud versus like the traditional method of app development?
So what I've seen, let's say coming from the legacy building Java applications that don't run in the cloud versus, so just a regular Java developer versus a cloud developer who now has to understand all of these services. For the cloud developer, there is more emphasis placed on architecture. So you're not just this hardcore developer, you really have to understand all of the different cloud services and how all of the pieces and components fit together to build an application. So with cloud development, there is some level of systems architecture that you really have to understand. And then the list of cloud services can be overwhelming. So you definitely have to have a good grasp and understanding of which services you need to use. Do you need to use NoSQL versus typical RDS instance? So you really just have to understand architecture as well. That's the biggest difference that I've seen.
Mhm. Okay, that does make sense. So with that difference, given that a developer has to look at the holistic picture when developing a cloud native app, why should a developer care about like building a cloud native app? Why shouldn't they just continue building the app the way they have traditionally built so far?
Well, definitely, I would say this, it's a skill set that is in huge demand.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, being in the industry for 24 years, I have to be a lifelong learner.
Mm-hmm.
And I often gravitate to not what's new and what's cool, but where are the jobs? What are people hiring for? So being a cloud developer, it's definitely a skill that is in high demand. So I would advise you to learn that skill so that you can remain marketable in the industry.
That makes sense.
And it's a lot of fun. It makes life as a developer so much easier when you're able to just focus on writing code. Like that's a developer's dream. I don't care about the servers. I just want to write code. Yeah.
That does make sense.
Yeah.
And to your point, like most of our students who take courses from Udacity are generally in the category of lifelong learners just because they value learning so much and want to be at the top of the game. So thank you so much for bringing that up. So you did mention that you have some experience about migrating existing apps to cloud. And I know I hear a lot of trend about companies who are trying to do that as well. Is this like a common thing that you are observing where companies are generally trying to move their existing apps to cloud?
Yeah, so because of a lot of the cost benefits that I mentioned earlier, about, say back in 2015, 2016, my organization made the decision that we were going to start migrating our legacy applications to the cloud. And then a few years later, we made the decision, okay, all new apps, let's think about cloud first before we deploy them internally. And now we're moving to this trend where we are saying cloud only. So we're just continuing to rely on the cloud for delivering our apps. So yeah, there's definitely a trend.
So can you explain a bit more about the difference between cloud first versus cloud only? What does those terms mean? Because you hear those terms a lot when you're
Right.
computing.
So I can speak to what it means for my organization. So whenever we look at creating a new application, so we build a lot of custom apps. So our directive is to look at the cloud first. Can we solve this using services in the cloud as opposed to taking this application and deploying it into our internal data center?
Mm-hmm.
So that's how we look at cloud first. And now we're talking about cloud only. This essentially means all of our applications live in the cloud. We need to migrate all of our legacy systems to the cloud. Any new system has to be built on the cloud.
Very, very interesting.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. So when companies think about moving their like existing apps to cloud, do they also think about breaking those apps into what we call microservices? What are the benefits that microservices bring to this whole movement to cloud?
Sure. So when I think about our legacy, let's say our legacy Java applications, so they're built, we just call them a monolith because everything, the presentation layer, the data access layer, the services layer is bundled, tightly coupled in this one artifact, like a WAR file that you deploy. But when we decided to take an application and move it to the cloud, we did not repeat that same model because it just didn't make sense. So with a monolith, like I said, everything is tightly coupled. It's hard to reuse and share functionality across systems. And so when we take a legacy application and migrate it to the cloud, we specifically look at ways to break it apart into what we call microservices. It's really just smaller components. You break out smaller components of that application and you create APIs, and that basically allows you to scale. In the cloud, that's one thing that the cloud does for you. It automatically scales your applications resources based on the load. how many users are accessing your system. But then also you're able to share functionality across systems. And so, yeah, so definitely when we look at migrating our legacy monolith applications to the cloud, we take this microservices architecture approach.
Okay, that does make sense. So one thing that you mentioned was it helps in scaling up the apps, and then cloud can take care of it, and you probably, like as a developer, doesn't have to think about the scaling part too much. Are there like other benefits to microservices architecture in general?
Let's see.
Or maybe no, maybe scaling is the biggest thing that we.
Well, I think for us, it's also the ability to share and reuse components.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, I'll take Chick-fil-A where I work as an example. A lot of our systems need to get location data. So how many locations do we have? What are the location IDs? And once we migrated to microservices, we were able to break that functionality out, let's just say location information, into this smaller reusable component that is now always the source of truth for location information. And we're able to share that little service across all of our systems.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another benefit that I've seen.
Oh, that's great. And then that also ensures the consistency of like the application, right? Like they're getting the same location data from, so it does make sense.
Right.
One thing that I hear a lot about these days in the cloud computing space is a term called serverless. What is serverless and why is it becoming so popular?
Right. So first I'll say when we talk about serverless, there's still a server involved, of course, but it's just that you really don't care about it. So someone else is responsible for provisioning that server, standing it up, managing it, maintaining it. You don't care about it. You don't care if it's a server in Georgia or a server in California. All you really care about is like using the compute power, but you're able to really focus on writing the code. AWS Lambda is a great example of serverless. If you guys have heard of that, it's just a function that runs in the cloud and you write the code, and where it runs, you're not really concerned about it. Yeah, but there are still servers and serverless. You just don't care about it and you don't really manage them.
That does make sense. So now I can understand why this is becoming so popular. If I don't have to think about deploying my own servers or provisioning my own servers. So yeah, I would want that.
That's a developer's dream.
Yeah. That makes sense. Okay, so we have been joined by a lot of students or potential students on this call. So from those perspective, like who might want to start their career in cloud computing space or looking to, get advanced in this space, what are some of the skills you think, Kesha, the employers are looking for when they're looking to hire a cloud developer?
So at least maybe 1 year of experience with one of the major cloud services like AWS, GCP, or Azure. Mm-hmm. And then definitely experience as a developer. You definitely have to have coding experience, I would say, in one of the big programming languages like Python or Java or C#. And then also, like I mentioned, some level of systems architecture experience so that you demonstrate that you understand how all of these different parts and pieces fit together to build a system. And then certifications, I'm kind of on the fence. They're helpful, but for me, and like when I'm looking at hiring a new engineer, it's more so that you can demonstrate through a portfolio of work. You can demonstrate what you've done in the cloud.
Mm-hmm. That's really good to know that you're looking more like AWS or all the major cloud providers have their certifications in this space, but more than those certification stamps, you're looking more for the portfolio of projects that the students have worked on, or somebody like a new person has worked on when you're making a hiring decision rather than that certification.
Right, definitely.
So what advice would you give to these students who want to get into this space or learn about this space? Like anything else, like besides focusing more on building their portfolio of projects and learning about systems engineering? Any
definitely go through the Udacity Nanodegree. No, I think it's, all that to say it's a great start, because at the end you'll have this portfolio of projects. But just I would say the cloud, like I said before, it's a game changer and it's a very exciting space to be in. So just be hungry for knowledge, just always trying to learn what's new, what's out there around cloud computing, because the cloud is not going anywhere. It's literally, I feel like it's taking over the world. So now is a great time to start learning.
Yeah, that does make sense. So maybe like, since you brought up cloud, like Udacity's Nanodegree program in cloud space, I can talk a bit more about what we have launched. So last week, Udacity launched 2 cloud programs in the cloud computing space. One is focused more towards cloud developers. So this is focused for developers who want to learn about different services in cloud and how do you build cloud native apps. And also different kind of projects that you would be going through this program would be, first you would be building your own cloud native app, which is more like an Instagram kind of an app using AWS services. The second project that you would be building is breaking an existing monolithic app into microservices. And as Kesha mentioned, like microservices does bring a lot of cost savings and efficiency and scaling benefits to any applications. So that's also a skill that you would develop through this program. And the last course for this program is more focused on serverless. So you would learn to build your own serverless applications. So the idea there is you don't have to worry about provisioning your own servers. You can literally provision all the services using code. So that's also like one of the skills that we would teach. And forgot to mention, Kesha is an instructor for one of the courses for our program. So definitely check her course out as well, which is more on the cloud fundamentals, where she goes over all the different services that are available with AWS for compute, storage, networking, and many, many more. So that's our cloud developer Nanodegree program. We have launched the second cloud program, which is more focused towards DevOps professionals. So that program is more targeted towards either developers who want to get into more deployment and infrastructure management provisioning kind of profile, or for the ops professionals. So traditionally people who are more sysadmins or who are more on the operation sides of the whole engineering ecosystem, who wants to get into the DevOps space. As you might have noticed, like DevOps is one of the latest trends that we hear a lot about. Like DevOps jobs are one of the hardest jobs, the most required jobs. So there is a huge demand for that. In the DevOps program, you'll begin with Kesha's course as well, which talks about all the services that are available with cloud. Then you'll learn about infrastructure as code. So basically using CloudFormation, which is AWS services, you would be able to deploy your own infrastructure, which is a very practical skill as a DevOps person. And then you'll learn about building the CI/CD pipelines using Jenkins, and how do you monitor and log those, like the data that you are collecting there. And finally, we talk about Kubernetes at scale in that course. So that is the whole profile of the Cloud DevOps program. So with that, I think we have more like all the questions that I had prepared, but I see that there are some questions from the students. So maybe Kesha, I can read them out to you and you can answer those. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. So one of the questions that got asked was, you have outlined the benefits of cloud. What is the flip side of cloud? What are probably, I think the question is like, what are the negatives of cloud?
I don't think there are any negatives, no. Negatives for the cloud. Let's see. I think I touched on it a bit earlier, and I can speak to from my organization. So we have a lot of our applications running in the cloud, but there are still some applications that we run in our internal data center. So I mentioned that security is still, for a lot of companies, it's still a concern. So like all of our customer data, PII information, we're not comfortable with that running in the cloud. So we haven't really been able to go fully cloud only, even though that's where we're trying to be. But I think the downside for some could be like security concerns around data.
Do you think, like one of the trends that I was recently reading is around cost, even though like people say cloud is cheaper, but there is also not so much transparency around cost for public providers. Do you think that's also one of the factors that companies are wary about, or is that not?
That could be a concern for some. I haven't really worked with the Google platform or the Microsoft, the Azure platform. I work solely in AWS, and I know I've been able to set up alerts to alert me, like if my bill is going to be over a set amount each month for a particular service.
Yeah.
I'll set up notifications.
Okay.
Yeah, and then there are some services that are just expensive to use. So for example, machine learning. I mean, that's a hot topic now. That service through AWS is expensive.
Yeah.
But then I wouldn't have easy access to that compute power to train machine learning models on my own.
Right.
So, yeah, it's just
it's a trade-off.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you so much for answering that question, Kesha. Another question is FAS, FAAS, a form of serverless, or do they mean the same thing, or are they different?
So FAS, function as a service, that is essentially serverless. So when we think about AWS Lambda, that is considered to be function as a service. So yeah, it's serverless.
Okay, great. So the second question is more targeted towards the programs that we have just launched. And the question is more targeted towards like which programs they should take. So maybe Kesha, you can, from your perspective, maybe you can give an answer, and then I can pair it up with like what I know about this. So we have one program for cloud developer and one program for cloud engineer, cloud DevOps. And what do you think, like who should take these courses, these programs, and why, if you have a perspective?
So I really think it depends on what you enjoy doing and where you're trying to go in your career. So if you want to stay more so on just the application development side, then definitely the cloud developer. But if you have a passion around operations, then you would go with the cloud DevOps engineer. Me personally, I love development, so I would go for the cloud developer. But everybody's different.
Yeah, thank you so much for laying that out clearly, Kesha. I would say the same thing. If you want, like if you are a developer and want to continue building apps, building software, or using cloud, then cloud developer is the right program for you. But if you want to think about how do you provision an infrastructure, how do you deploy that infrastructure, maintain that infrastructure, and continue to monitor that infrastructure, then cloud DevOps is the right program for you. Then there is another question. What is your take on Cloud Act and its consequences for EU companies? Cloud Act seems to be incompatible with GDPR. So AWS, GCP, and Azure seems to be off limits.
Okay, so I made some, but PR, I'm familiar with that around the machine learning space, where there's a provision that says all everyone has a right to know. So if a machine learning program was used to make a decision about whether or not they got this loan, they have a right to know why that decision was made. So that's my area of knowledge around GDPR.
Got it. And
so this person may need to ask me some more questions.
It seems like the US Cloud Act basically provides another avenue for government to access customer data. Versus avenue. Yeah, I don't know much about Cloud Act as well. Maybe we can get back, like we can do more research and get back to answer
that one requires more research.
Yeah. Any other questions, team? Like people who are on the call? Doesn't look like we have more questions. So, well, thank you all.
Oh, I see questions.
Yeah, there is a question.
I see a Q&A section. Okay, I see one that says, as a developer point of view, is there any difference between on-premise versus public cloud? So on-premises, that's your internal data center, and public cloud, that's AWS. So from a developer perspective, the tools, the development and deployment tools as a developer, it's slightly different. But at the end of the day, you're still, doing more development work. I'm trying to think from our developers and how they work, because we really give them tools to kind of enable and hide all of like where code is being deployed. So specifically for our developers, no, because we have a separate team that focuses on the deployment of the code. So they're still able to do development.
Got it. So for a developer, it doesn't make a difference whether they're building code for on-premise cloud versus a public cloud in your company.
Right.
Okay, that does make sense. Then, yeah, what tips do you have for developers who want to transition into cloud architecture role?
So a big piece of it is definitely understanding all of the different services and how they fit together and how you use them and when you would want to use one over the other. It's important for you to understand that.
Okay. Then one thing that I also heard about cloud architecture is like cloud architects generally tend to be a bit more senior role in an organization just because it does require some years of experience.
That is very true.
I also wanted to highlight that. So if you, another question is, if you don't have an experience in DevOps or development, but you have development experience of a test automation or testing, are any of these degrees recommended? Can someone with a QA background transition into this space? I have an answer for this, but Kesha.
Okay, I'm glad you do. Go ahead.
If you have a QA background, then maybe DevOps is something that you can transition into. Our prerequisites for this whole program is pretty low, just because we have heard the need of people who have been in like the similar background and wanting to move to cloud computing space. So DevOps might be a good place for you to start. What you require there is just some kind of command line experience and being able to like be comfortable with some programming language. It doesn't have to be any specific. It's just if you are conceptually or understand one or two programming languages, like some basics of programming language, that program should be good for you. But also like keep in mind, that's one way to look at it, but also keep in mind is something like what a DevOps person does is something that you want to do as well. So maybe like do a bit more research on what a DevOps role entails and see if you can see yourself in that role. Yeah. Then, what is Heroku considered to be, Kesha? You know?
I have not used that.
So Heroku is, I have heard of Heroku. Heroku is generally like if you are one person developer sitting in your garage and trying to develop apps, I think that's for like deployment, easing deployment, I think that people use Heroku for, at least here in Silicon Valley, I've heard that a lot. But I don't think Heroku is one of the services for cloud. And so it's a very different, I think, architecture. If you are one person army trying to develop an app very quickly, then starting cloud native, I think, would be the right way to start, just because you can scale that up and start very quickly. Then, okay. Another question is, do you think it is feasible to start to jump into AWS without a solid background in infrastructure, basically network, CCNA, etc.?
I would definitely say yes to this question. We just need exposure to networking. You don't have to have years and years of experience or certifications around networking or anything like that.
Yeah, I think that's also one of the benefits of cloud, right? It abstracts away all the infrastructure from the developer, that you don't have to worry about the networking and all the nuances about networking, right? So even if you don't have that pre-nailed down, you can start just developing on it and have AWS take care of it for you.
Definitely.
What are some of the challenges you see for someone with no IT background that is looking to make a career change to cloud computing, looking to obtain an MS in cloud computing?
Well, I can give my 2 thoughts on that. So with no IT background, it's going to be tough for you to be a cloud developer. I would say start with learning how to code. So as a cloud developer, at my company, we look for people who have coding experience. So definitely start there, have a strong basis in coding. That may be a good starting point. And then as you're building applications, start using a cloud service to deploy those applications. But yeah, that would be the biggest challenge, learning how to code. Yeah. But it's doable. You can definitely do it. Yeah.
So we actually have a program which helps you learn how to code. It's called Intro to Programming for the people who are exactly in the same shoes as you are, have no IT background. It starts with very basics and teaches you how to learn how to code in HTML, CSS, a little bit of Python and JavaScript. That is to make sure like you get your feet wet in programming before you can start like a full-fledged development. So I would definitely recommend that course if you want to transition into that space. Definitely a good course to check out. And it's a 3 to 4 months course, so not a pretty intensive course as well. Any other questions? So maybe, Kesha, one last question I have for you is...
Okay. Was it on the list? No, I'm just joking.
No. So I know that we have, both our cloud programs are on AWS. And there are like 3 main cloud providers, public cloud providers today: AWS, Google GCP, and Microsoft Azure. Why do you think, AWS is the right public cloud platform to start their experience in?
I would definitely say AWS is a great place to start, because from my point of view, they are so much further along than the other cloud providers. When I look at all of the services that AWS offers, it can be overwhelming, but it's also exciting. So they have really literally, I feel like, thought of everything that you would need in order to build any type of system, anything around machine learning, AI, Java web applications, microservices, APIs. So I just, from my experience and what I've seen, AWS is further along than the other platforms.
Okay, cool. That does make sense. So with that, everybody do check out our cloud programs. Let us know if you have more questions. We are happy to answer them offline as well. Yeah, if this team doesn't have more questions, then we can let Kesha go. So thank you so much, Kesha, for all your great words of wisdom today and sharing all those insights.
My pleasure.
All right.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.